buying pornography is paying for sex. So I would say in my adolescence I paid for sex. It spiraled, and it wasn't until I was in my mid to late 20s that I started frequenting strip clubs. And then ultimately, from there it led to massage parlors, and then I guess the bottom would be when I found myself soliciting a prostitute and through the internet, and found her and made an arrangement, and I walked up to her apartment and had an envelope and had cash in it and set it on the table, and then we had sex, and it was remarkably broken. My wife said, "What have you done?" And I said in no uncertain terms, "I've made a mess of our life."
The truth is that prostitution exists because there's a demand for it. Men are willing to pay for sex. But we can't keep turning our backs on the situation and pretend like it's not our problem. We need to change our mindset on how we think about women. We need to be part of the solution. We need to defend dignity.
It is only in place and on the scale that it is happening because men are willing to pay for sex with people who are under the control of violent criminals. And our research for Invisible Chains found that men in Canada either don't know or don't care that the person they're paying for sex with is under the control of someone else. Pangi, who's the first convicted human trafficker in Canada, his victim was a 14-year-old girl with fetal alcohol syndrome, and the second victim, a 15-year-old girl who was homeless. And Canadian men, thousands of them, had no problem paying over $400,000 in total to sexually abuse these two young girls. They are still suffering long-term trauma even though their trafficker is still in jail, and not a single one of the thousands of men who paid to abuse them has faced any kind of criminal penalty whatsoever. Even though we have stiff laws on the books dealing with paying for a sex act with a minor, we rarely see the charges ever laid, even in situations like this, where the case is really open and shut in terms of the age of the victim. And furthermore, we don't see any kind of call for action against them. Instead, what we often see in the media or in apologists for prostitution is to blame the victims, to say, well, why didn't they leave? Why didn't they escape? And doing a bit more digging, you find out why. The 15-year-old girl, she was subject to physical violence, beatings. He tattooed his name on the back of her neck. He then threatened to kidnap her younger brother, a 3-year-old boy. And so we really need to focus on the fact that this problem would not exist were it not for the demand that was paying to target these young girls and allowing traffickers to lucratively profit.
In prostitution, the ultimate goal is to keep men hidden. Men don't have a right to pay for sex. I do have a right to live free from violence, a right to live free from sexual assault. And I would argue that men merely having the assumption that they have the right to ask if we're for sale is a form of sexual assault. I would argue that the men who drive into my neighborhood asking my daughter and her friends if they're for sale have just sexually assaulted my daughter.
It's important for men to speak out about this and why it's wrong for other men to pay for sex with women and underage girls. It's how it destroys not only the lives of the people who are being bought, but those men who are eventually caught up in this web of lies, sex addiction, criminality, you name it. They end up bankrupt, divorced, and these are smart, intelligent men, or so they thought, and never thought that those consequences would come home to them, but they don't get to choose that. Those are consequences which are waiting for any man who would choose to engage in this. A lot of it is out of ignorance, I like to believe, that is why men are doing this. You're starting to see more men questioning the classic bachelor party at the strip club now. It's starting to change, and it should become one day as acceptable for someone to say, well, I don't go to strip clubs, as it is to say, well, I don't drink. Men need to really stand up against this with other men as well, and it's not easy, absolutely not, but unfortunately it's the same kind of thing that you've been dealing with as a young guy your whole life when it comes to peer pressure. And if you're not willing to take a stand against something like this, then there's really nothing else that you would have left to stand for.
Men in the church, I think, have to rise to the challenge of being every woman's protector, every woman's provider, and every woman's defender.
So where do we go from here? How do we defend dignity? I think that we can take a look at Swedish Nordic law as an example of how we can answer the question of ending prostitution. See, Sweden officially recognizes prostitution as the exploitation and violence towards women and children. Many people believe that the key is their twin legislation wherein they prosecute the purchasers of sex and then provide help and resources to the prostitutes themselves. We would like to advocate our government to adopt the Swedish Nordic model, and there's many practical ways that you can be involved.
People need to get informed, but then they need to get active. Well, I think it needs to start with changing public attitudes. It really isn't going to get that kind of political support unless there's a really big shift in public opinion. Advocate at the federal level for these important changes to the federal law, and at the provincial level and with our non-governmental service providers to help with those exit programs. What gets noticed is media and a groundswell of public support to deal with an issue. But when there's an organized movement, groups of people, coalitions of individuals who represent tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And that's why the faith-based community has been so effective in other countries at rallying behind the cause of those who are unseen and unheard. The doctor, the lawyer, the webmaster, the mechanic, it's anyone. And so because of that, it really requires a really set of much deeper changes both to law and to societal attitudes to try to shift this.
Because if we're not going to talk to our kids and our husbands and stuff like that, let me tell you, everywhere else is going to be having that conversation with them. Everywhere else.
Focus on some specific problems that have a specific solution. One of the things we need to ensure is that our members of parliament hear that there are Canadians who support this change in law, get them on the record supporting laws, policies, and programs that will act to abolish prostitution, not to seek to regularize and profit from it, with the state becoming really just a pimp in the end. And it's quite appalling when there's no one who's willing to stand up. Because I can tell you that those people who are being currently exploited are unable to do that, and they are relying on us to do this. They've all sort of dedicated their lives to this issue, and that's not something that everyone is asked to do at all. But certainly there are moments when people have an opportunity to contribute.
In the book Half the Sky, Nicholas Kristof says that history has repeatedly shown us that where our values are at stake, leadership must come from ordinary citizens like you. Psalm 82:3 says that we are to defend the cause of the weak and the fatherless, to maintain the rights of the poor and oppressed. You can make a difference. At our website, www.defenddignity.ca, you'll find a number of great resources that will help you take that first step of action. So choose one action, just one, and join in the fight with our God who maintains the rights of the poor and oppressed, and be the one who will defend the dignity of women.